Do you place yourself anywhere on like the conservative to liberal spectrum?
I am, I would say I'm more socially conservative. Politically, I'm independent, but I tend to be more libertarian.
Yeah, that's a good way to be. And I think this will be a good starting point for this final leg of this discussion, which is, like, we've seen the consequences of critical race theory. We've seen the consequences of the things that critical race theory are trying to address, and I think making things worse. But the key question of this episode here today and this whole discussion is, well, what the heck do we do about it? Because there were efforts in the past year by former President Trump to ban critical race theory from being, pushed through the bureaucracy, to being included in certain corporate trainings, to push the Department of Education to make sure that these things were never getting into public schools. He issued an executive order on September 22nd of last year to do just that. If you go to that executive order now, it comes up as an Error 404 message. It has been taken down by the Biden administration. And in Texas, Tennessee, Florida, Oklahoma, Arkansas, North Carolina, state legislatures are pushing bans on critical race theory. The one bill in North Carolina, Bill 324, it does a number of things that I kind of want to just put a finger on here real quick, which is that, like, it tackles the ideas of critical race theory. It says that you cannot teach certain things in the schools, including like the belief that the U.S. is a meritocracy and an inherently racist or sexist thing, or that the United States was created by members of a particular race or sex for the purpose of oppressing members of another race or sex. You are not allowed to teach under that bill an individual solely by virtue of his or her race is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive. Other things that just like put a limit on like what can be discussed by a certain teacher. And this raises the question, like, how do you actually react? Do you ban critical race theory? Because that seems like a really harsh measure to go with in terms of force of government.
Well, as someone, again, who is a child of the libertarian tradition, when people talk about banning things, especially banning ideas, I'm immediately called back. Yeah, I'm immediately called back to John Stuart Mill's, what he said in On Liberty, Chapter 3, I believe. And he talked about how you need to merge experience with discourse to understand knowledge. And all that means is that I have to be able to experience knowledge or through a book or whatever, and I have to be able to talk about it. And banning kind of eliminates the ability to have discourse, or so you think. But when you talk about banning, we're not actually banning the ideas from being necessarily discussed. Most of these bills ban the ideas from being stated as unequivocal truth. In government schools, there is a very big distinction because the government already regulates education. And for a libertarian, that's a non-starter in the first place. But since the government already regulates education, it has the ability to set educational standards under the auspices of the First Amendment. So it is a government institution. So if the government is already setting educational standards, getting rid of teaching critical race theory as a fact is nothing more different than teaching evolution as a fact, and that is the government setting standards about what it believes is valuable. If people really have an issue with critical race theory being banned in education, you know what you could do? You could push for the decentralization of education, push for the privatization of schools, and then you would be able to teach whatever you wanted to teach. But
that is
while
a
you were under the
huge problem
auspices,
to take on, the decentralization of education, whereas you just take this fight straight to your state legislatures to ban certain kinds of curriculum. And like Democrats paint this way. Like they say, like in North Carolina, that what they're doing is they're chilling free speech by teachers. They are putting a limit on what can be discussed, and that like we should be able to have uncomfortable conversations in classrooms, which just makes me flash back to being in school. I'm like, do you think we don't already have uncomfortable conversations in classrooms minus critical race theory and Ibram-X. Kendi stuff being pushed onto teachers and classrooms and students? Like, we already have tough conversations about American history. So it doesn't seem to me that like the hands-off approach for CRT is working. Like, if we do nothing, then they will steamroll the public education system entirely, and they will put this into curriculums if we don't stand up and use, I don't know, just like really strong means to say no, and that might be government force.
I think, the government is supposed to be by the will of the people. So if the people of a particular jurisdiction does not want something, that's our system. They can go up and try to lobby for that to not happen. So these different school districts where the parents are showing up, that is the number one step to try and push back against critical race theory. Whether it works or not is a different story, but at least that attempt needs to happen. I think in some of these places, the parents, they're doing their 9 to 5, they're unaware what is actually going on behind the scenes, so they're not doing anything about it. But I think more and more people are waking up. They're becoming more aware that it is happening. My thing is, I'm a realist. Will that actually stop the teaching of critical race theory?
Yeah, probably. You can't ban ideas. No.
No.
Yeah.
And so, even though I'm saying go to your schools, make sure it's not necessarily part of the curriculum, teachers can teach in a variety of different ways. It's a matter of, will they be disciplined? Will they stop it? Will the principal say, give them a wink and say, listen, I'm okay with it, just, don't be so obvious next time, or maybe try this book instead. It's going to happen, and it's been happening for years. We've all heard of the liberal teacher who likes to teach feminism.
Yeah.
It's stuff like that where the teachers are going to teach in a particular way. Whether they stay neutral or not is a different story.
I love the idea of individualism in schools and classrooms. And I think by the nature of public schools, they can't have that. They want everything to be streamlined. They want all teachers to teach the same thing, to be the same way. But we've all experienced, if we've been in public schools, right? Luck of the draw. Sometimes you just get that feminist teacher, or you get that really macho coach who is just a total jerk. And there's nothing to be done about it because people are people and personalities differ. And there's nobody to say that they have to act a certain way or believe a certain sort of things or tweet certain ways. But CRT and these curriculums, these suggestions, these webinars, they do use force against people to submit to the ideas. I'm fine, honestly, I'm really fine with a school having a discussion in the classrooms about how to be anti-racist, as long as children can say, that doesn't make sense, I don't believe that, or say this is wrong. If people can say wrong and object to it and not be punished, then I think it's all within the bounds of open discourse and freedom. But that's not what happens.
Well, so do I. Right. And it's not what happens because critical race theory is not made for discourse. Critical race theory is made for advocacy. It is basically, and if you read the tagline of some of these critical race theory papers, they basically say where academia meets advocacy, which suggests that academia is not meant for advocacy, but they're making it an advocating position anyway. And so it's not necessarily interested in having this free range of ideas. In fact, there was a paper written by a famous critical theorist who works with Kimberly Crenshaw, who founded critical race theory, called Mary Matsuda, and she basically used critical race theory to argue why First Amendment absolutism, or First Amendment, being in defense of free speech, is dangerous towards marginalized communities. There are critical race theorists who actually want to ban speech that can inflict psychic violence upon people. A critical race theory is absolutely not about, having a free range discussion. Critical race theory is about implementing a narrative upon someone else by the virtue, or in the name of the virtue, of protecting people who may not need protecting. And then if you don't do that, you're against those kind of people. So it's inherently a dangerous thing that does not warrant conversation. It warrants action, in my opinion.